Hi, Curt. Welcome to the sisterhood.
Hello, I've never been welcomed to a sisterhood before, and I'm now it's an honor to have been finally invited into that space.
Your life is complete, Curt.
It is. It is. Uh, like it's never been before. Believe you me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, tell everyone a little bit about you, just
Hmm.
where you live in the world and what you do in your
Yeah.
days.
Yeah. Well, our home is in Northern Virginia, in Arlington, Virginia, where we've been for the better part of 30 years. And my wife Phyllis is so I've been married for 35 years, and we have a daughter who's 31 and a son who's 28. And so those three relationships have been powerfully formational for me. God has used them in shaping me in ways that are like none others. And I'm just really grateful for the way that I've been loved through thick and thin by all three of them. I grew up in Eastern Ohio in a small town of about 800 people. I'm the youngest of four sons. My parents were in their mid 40s when I was born, and all my brothers were like 18, 16, 11 when I came along. And so that has its own storyline, and the way that has also shaped my formation in ways that are really rich and good, in ways that I've also had to work through. I think I think that the most plain treasure that I have is the collection of deep friendships that people who have been willing to call me their friend over the course of years. And I've got a number of them that are I just would go to the wall for me. And there's nothing I have that is any more valuable than that. And I need that because I am, as I like to say to folks, I am a professional sinner. I'm not an amateur. I'm good at it. I figure if you've done something for a long time and you're really effective at it, you can call yourself a pro. And so I'm that. And then for a living, I'm a psychiatrist, a general psychiatrist. So I see individuals, adults. I have seen adolescents for a while. I haven't seen as many adolescents in recent years. And we also do a lot of group work in our practice, which has been the case for the last 5 to 7 years or so, a lot of that. And that has really changed my own professional trajectory and has been the source of a lot of the work that I've done with writing work and so forth and so on. And so I do that work. And then I've written some on this. We work at this interface of neuroscience and Christian spiritual formation. So I've written 3 books. The most recent one that has come out, this past October. And I have a podcast called the Being Known Podcast, which we're recording our 4th season, which we're really pleased about that. And I think I say that, the work that I do with patients, people come for all kinds of reasons that we could easily tick off in kind of clinical terms, depression, anxiety, and so on. I said, but I think the thing that, my task is at the end of the day to help people tell their story more truly. Because so much of what it is that helps people find their way into my office in the first place has everything to do with their having told their story in a particular way in the middle of their trauma, in the middle of everything else that's happening, that emerges with a certain set of symptoms that are all worthy of paying attention to, but that are all kind of encased in some form or fashion in the particular way that they are understanding the nature of the story that they think they're living in. And if I continue to live in that story that is not true to the way the world really is, I'm going to continue to create trouble for myself. And most of the trouble that I'm creating for myself, I'm often completely unaware that I'm doing. And so to tell a different story takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of time, and it takes the presence of others who are willing to walk with you into those parts of your own story that you would really rather not talk about, that we need to talk about if we're going to tell a different story. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but
I
have it.
loved every detail. And I think it really, yeah, helped us to see kind of where your origin story of this work is.
Mm.
And that's even interesting to hear. You wrote an entire book about shame and
Mm.
the soul of
Mm.
shame.
Mm.
And tell us a little bit about why does shame sideline us? And I like what you said just a minute ago about we don't even know how we are sometimes viewing, living our stories, that
Mhm.
we have this unconscious part of us
Mhm.
that's derailing us and we don't even know it. Would you name that as shame? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I try to get at this a bit in the book, and as I tell folks, I don't know that shame so much has a definition, so I don't know that I can define it as much as I describe what its characteristics are. And in the book, I go through a number of those characteristics. I think, for our purposes here, a couple of things to bear in mind about it is that it's a phenomenon, first of all, that happens, that we experience kind of neurophysiologically. It's not just this abstract thing out there in the ether. It is a thing that, of course, emerges as a function of my brain activity, but it's an entire embodied thing that happens to me, and that it happens to me initially in response to something that happens between me and someone else. But after that, I can kind of pick up that baton, and then I can become someone who just reinforces the whole shame neurophysiologic experience, because I'll repeat it literally in my reflecting brain over and over and over again. I just reinforce the whole thing. And in the process, I'm also, like, because we're humans and we can't not do this, I'm also telling a particular story in order to make sense of that shame. And the narrative and the nature of shame is such that it is most powerfully reinforced when I experience it in isolation, when it's just in the privacy of my own mind. I'm not telling you anything about it. I'm not letting you in on any of that, which means the story that I tell to make sense of it is only made repeatedly valid by the story that I tell. And I don't have anybody else who can come in and like be curious about that and say, oh, wait a minute, like I've actually, as you're telling this, like I don't feel shame in your presence about this thing that you're talking about, because I don't really give you the opportunity to do that. I reinforce this. So that's that whole physiologic thing. Another thing is that it's important to know that this phenomenon begins very young in human development, very early. 15 to 18 months of age is when we can start to pick up this sense. We start to have this take place in our bodies, in our brains, in our minds, and between you and me, and so forth. And so we're really practiced at it. We're really good at it. And we've been doing it long before we have known that we're doing it. So most of the time, most of what we would say that we're experiencing that actually is our shame experience, we wouldn't necessarily categorize as such. But it's still having the same impact on us. And then the other thing that I would say is that, from the perspective of what we might call the biblical narrative, I think it would be important to say, and this question has been put to me, like, well, is shame just a bad thing? And I say, like, no, shame is actually, it would appear that you read the Genesis account, it would appear that shame is part of the created narrative. Like it's built into the creation. It appears to be a signal to tell me that something's up, to try to get my attention. The problem is not so much that I experience it at all. The problem is, what do I do in response to it? Paul writes in 2 Corinthians this notion that there is a godly grief that leads to repentance, and there is an ungodly grief that leads to death. And I would suggest that when we experience shame, a godly response to it is that we are responding to it in the context of a community in which we can practice saying, this is where I am. The problem is that we have such a history that the ungodly response to this grief is what we watched unfold in the Garden of Eden, and what has been with us ever since, and what I do, multiple times a day when I, don't tell things. And so I think, this kind of reinforcement, what we do with this, it's just thing that happens to us. It's also important to know this, that as I when we talk with folks, we remind them, like, we don't live in a neutral universe. We live in a universe. As a Christian, I believe that there is an evil force whose intent it is to devour us and everything in creation. And it doesn't just use shame to make us feel bad. It uses shame to devour us, but on the way, it strangles our capacity to create. So I feel bad, but because I feel bad, then I don't make the things, the works that have been prepared for me before the foundation of the world, which the texts would indicate. Not only are they important for us right here and now as the new heaven is appearing, new heaven and earth, but there is a sense, we get the sense in scripture that the works that we do now are somehow going to have a place in the new heaven and earth that's coming. They serve a function. Everything that we do now is going to have a mirrored, echoed place in the world that's coming. And evil doesn't want this. And so it's not just a matter of, we'll shame you, you'll feel bad, you'll piss off God, you'll be upset. It's like evil can't tolerate beauty, and as such, it can't afford for us to be in that place of creating beauty relationally or artistically or whatever it is that we're doing. And shame is one of the most potent weapons that it uses to keep that from happening. Sorry, that was long-winded too.
And there was a lot in there that I think I want to mirror back a few items that our listeners might be hearing, might be globbing onto. And I'm going to go way back to what you said about shame being between me and another person. Because I think for a lot of listeners, either as women or with our teenagers or young adult children that we're trying to coach through life, we may be doing things that we don't feel like are really between us and another person, but we're still ashamed of them. Mm-hmm. So how do we interpret that as far as that shame cycle? If it's something that I'm doing in private that really doesn't have anything to do with someone else, is it because I'm afraid of what someone else is going to think of it? Is mm-hmm. that the relational element?
I think what I'm referring to is that shame emerges in its origins within me in response to something that is happening between me and another person. So this can happen this happens all the time, right? You're talking to your kid and you're just talking in a normal voice, and somehow something is going on with your child, your teenager, in that teenage brain in such a way that, like, you know, you speak to your child and your child says, "Stop yelling at me." You're like, I didn't know that's what I was doing. And in fact, if you'd like brought 3 or 4 other people in the room, they might say to your teenage child, your mom actually wasn't yelling. Mm-hmm. But your child interprets, senses, there's something that gets evoked in your child that is a function of an interaction with another person. And your child begins to tell that story. My mom doesn't like me. I mean, you know, she's here, like they might make something up. But the mm-hmm. point is, the point for this is to recognize that there are times when we actually, you remember, we all have experiences in which someone has done something that really has been shaming. It might be very small, it might be very minor, or it might be big. And so my shame starts to originate as a function of an interaction with other people. The healing and regeneration or recommissioning of my shame necessarily requires the presence of other people as well. I can't do this by myself. And so I have something that I'm ashamed of, and now I carry that with me into the room with everybody mm-hmm. else. And I necessarily then think, there's no way I would tell Alex or Krista this. It doesn't have anything to do with you. Mm-hmm. But I walk into the room and, like, I would never tell you these things, because even though you don't know me, it never started with you. It's got nothing to do with you. The reality is now it does, as far as my brain is concerned. Because you now are people that I know, and you now are people that, like, my brain is aware of, that, like, you also, like, qualify as potential people who, once you knew this thing about me, like, you would, like, go on your next podcast and say, whatever you do, don't have anything to do with this cat from Virginia. Mm-hmm. And so this is the thing, our brain doesn't know how to not do with our shame anything that isn't involving other people. Like, because the very nature of it is like, I want to keep it hidden. I'm going to keep it hidden from everybody. Now, I might have a different response to other people in the room where I have a deeper connection or a more vulnerable connection if it's somebody that I feel even more risk with. But the reason that I'm highlighting this is around the question of recognizing that the neurophysiology, the neurobiology, the interpersonal neurobiology of shame is such that interpersonal relationships are always in play and part of it. And the reason that's important has to do with what we are doing in response to the shame that we carry once we know that it's there. Because the response that we want to have is, who are going to be the people that are going to be my cloud of witnesses before whom I can reveal this, in order for shame to no longer have the kind of neural as well as interpersonal capacity to keep me from creating beauty and goodness in the world.
I feel like that's getting to one of my big questions for you. And that is, how do we make our brains work for us in those moments rather than against us? Because explain what's happening neurologically in those moments of choice, I guess, where we could share and we could be vulnerable, or we can go back to hiding. And like you said, the consequences of that, but we're not thinking necessarily of the consequences that, oh, we're not creating beauty in the world anymore. We may have a sense that it's holding us captive, but I don't know that we have that bigger story at play necessarily.
Right. And I would say that part of the reason that we don't have that bigger story in play probably says something about our attachment processes. So this is something else that we would talk about, that all of these, we talk about this notion of, in our work, we like people to know like how we're defining the mind, and how the mind, if it's flourishing, is an integrated system. So it's got lots of different functioning parts. We want those parts each to be well developed. We want those parts to come together, linked together. And so a system that is differentiated, well developed, each part, what I sense, what I image, what I feel, what I think, what I do with my body, those different parts of the orchestra come together in linkage. We've got a conductor that brings all of the different parts of the orchestra together. That's a flourishing, complex system. But in order for that to happen in a developing child, that child's brain, that child's mind has to have an experience in which they are being seen, soothed, safe, secure by another human being. And so the very notion that I get to a place in my adulthood where I'm not thinking about the creativity stuff, I'm not like, has everything to do with somewhere along the line, I never learned to tell my story in the first place, that that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Which says some things about, well, what is my attachment pattern like? What is it like for me to be seen, soothed, safe, secure? And how do I tell the story of the world in which I'm living? In which, when I've experienced shame, I've had someone who's been able to help me articulate that, oh, this is what's happening. And this is why this is happening. And this is what we want to do in response to this. So for instance, I've given this example before. So the 10-year-old boy who comes to his dad with a 92% on his math test, and he's never had a 92%. And he says, and he's so proud and joyful because, like, I've never had a 92. And here's my 92. And dad says, where's the other 8%? Now, dad is, if you were to, give him a psychiatric interview, he would say, I was just trying to help him work harder, be better. I want to help him be better at this. But dad's not thinking in terms of like how this whole thing now begins to literally, in this boy's brain, splice together those neural networks that represent his neurophysiologic experience of joy with those networks that represent his neurophysiologic experience of shame. And so these things start to get tangled together. And after a while, like if I'm the 10-year-old, I'm going to learn pretty quickly, I'm not bringing my 92% to my dad. I'm not bringing my paper until it's a 94 or 6 or 8 or 100%. And so I start to tell a story about this. And the story that I tell is, I didn't work hard enough. I need to work harder. And I do work harder. Now I get 95 and 96 and 98%. And I get the 100%. And why is it that I still feel like I'm not working hard enough? Now I'm getting 105%. And I still don't feel like, because I still think that the problem for me originally, having to do with how I tell my story, is that I'm not a hard enough worker. The story that I tell is not, I felt bad when I was 10 because my dad had stuff he wasn't like paying attention to. I felt bad because of something else that was happening in the room. I didn't feel bad all by myself. And this is really important because we have hundreds of verses in our songs that we write about the stories that we believe we're living in that have us believing that there's something wrong with me because I haven't had anybody be curious enough about me such that they would say, well, tell me what you're feeling. And I say, like, I think I'm fine. I'm feeling ashamed. And then we explore what's the story that you're telling that shame is authoring. And, you know, it's the story that, like, I'm not working hard enough. And you want to say, this is where we want to help you tell your story more truly. Because as long as you tell that story, I'm not working hard enough, you're also telling the story, I am not a hard enough worker. It's not what I'm not doing enough, it's who I am. And this is what shame starts to like form in us. It's a sense like who we are, not just what I've done, right? We say, guilty, I've done something bad. Shame, I am bad. And the fact that we're incredibly adaptive creatures. So we can collect tonnage of shame and still look to the world like we don't have a problem at all. Which is why, of course, you end up in my office and people wonder why you're why are you going to see Curt?
Yeah. I think what's so hard is, I mean, even as a parent, I'm cringing as you're talking because, I mean, who of us does not do things that cause shame in our kids? And we're
Right.
not trying to, we don't know. So not only are we receiving that, and then we have to, you know, we don't even know that, what did you call it? The severine of, what did you call it? The severine of whatever it was.
So, wait, I'm sorry. What did I call what?
Where you said when that happens, there's a severine in the brain, and I don't know what.
Like a disintegration.
Okay,
right,
disintegration.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I know that I'm disintegrating my children's brains all the time and not knowing it. And so I guess what hope is there for us?
Yeah.
What is the path forward? And
Yeah.
how do we not only heal from those ourselves? And you were just getting to that, but also how do we not do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I'm feeling shame about creating shame.
Right. Right. Well, of course, right. And so the thing is, like, that's also part of its nature, right? It's like self-perpetuating, right? I feel it and then I feel bad for feeling it and bad for feeling that I feel it and the whole 9 yards. But the fact that you say it is like a crucial part of the healing process, right? Shame depends upon isolation in order for it to survive, in order for it to expand, right? So your husband's an ENT, he knows about anaerobic bacteria, he knows about these are really bad infections because you want to get oxygen to that. Well, like shame is like an anaerobic infection in that like it likes not having, any air around. That's how it functions. So a couple things that I think there are really important and really helpful. The first thing I say to folks is, look, the news about shame is far worse than you know and far better than you can imagine. That's important to know. That's number one. Number two, the only way that you don't screw up your kids is don't have them. It's the only way. You can let them know that. Like, do you want would you rather be alive and have me be your mother, or would you rather be dead? Because I can see to that too. If you would rather that, we can see to that, right?
Uh-huh.
That's important. And another thing that is really important is like this process in which we say things and do things in which we hurt our kids' feelings and shame them and so forth, and we don't know that we're doing, like, Jesus is not worried about this process. He's not worried about it because he's too busy being in the process of being with us in this. So, and this is really an important thing. Shame gets its lifeblood and its disintegrating capacity from our not naming things.
Mm-hmm.
In the very act of naming something, the very act of bringing light into the room,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of good things begin to happen. And remember, like, to remind people of this too, like, there are acts of human behavior for which shame is the absolute proper response.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that our kids do for which they're ashamed, like, and they should be. Things that I do for which I'm ashamed, like, and I should be. The question is, what do I then do? What do I do when I'm in the middle of that? Well, I can, like, hide from that. I can run away from that. I can, right? And that's going to create more trouble for me. As parents, we can be curious with our kids. We can, like, when we notice. I mean, I have this one experience. I've told this publicly. Our son, who's 28, when he was in college, he was in the middle of this existential faith crisis, and we had this long conversation. And I was really, like, kind of eager to have this conversation with him because I too, from the time I was about 13 for about a 20-year stretch, was just in and out of an existential, like, thing. And I'm like, this is great because, like, I'm going to be the dad that I never had when it came to this kind of thing. And there I was talking to him in a way that basically said, if you don't believe in Jesus, I think you're an idiot. Like, so the very, you know how there's times when you're talking and the things that are coming out of your mouth, like, they shouldn't be. And the sooner you recognize them, like, the faster they try to get out of your mouth.
Yep. I know that feeling.
It was one of those conversations. Like, I should have shut my mouth 5, 7, 20 minutes ago, but I need to get all the words out before they don't get out.
I've started down this road. I need to finish it.
That's right. Right. We just need to unload the magazine. And, my relationship with my kids is just really precious. And I really wounded him.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was 2 weeks before 2 days later, he was leaving for school to go back to college. And, like, if things were not good. And I mean, I didn't say to him, I think you're an idiot, like, because evil is far more subtle than that. Right. It's like, I'm going to tell you you're an idiot, but I'm not going to use those words. So that's not really what I said. And all that kind of, all those shenanigans. But what was happening within me, like, as we like to say, I only shame people out of my own shame. That's where it comes from. It's this felt sense of, like, he's having a crisis. And as it turns out, though I wanted to be helpful, I felt my own anxiety about all this stuff. Like, if I'd only done this and this and this as a dad, you wouldn't have had this problem in the first place. How did I not equip you for, like, all the questions come cascading into my head. And essentially, I find myself in this place of feeling shame for not having been who I thought I was supposed to be. And so I'm just going to, like, share some of that with him. And this is how it operates. And so what do we have to do? We have to repair this. And so this is the thing that most kids don't have an experience of. They don't have an experience of a parent. I say, like, look, kids don't need parents who are perfect. Kids need parents who are attuned and who are willing to repair ruptures. That's what they need to do. Repair ruptures.
That's right.
And at the same time, we're all, we're now kind of in a cultural time in which we are training more and more people to become fragile. And so it becomes, the pendulum can swing through, the other way in which we don't ever want to hurt our kids. We don't ever want to do anything with our kids. So if I have any sense that I've hurt them in any way, shape, or form, I have to make sure that and they don't need that either. But what they do need to know is that they have a parent who they can count on, who's going to be attuned to them, and who in their attunement both is well aware of how when the parent does create a rupture that is legitimate, the parent can say, I did this and I'm sorry about that. Will you please forgive me? And a parent who is equally able to remain attuned to their child when they are going to tell their child no in some way, shape, or form. Most of our shaming often comes in our attempt to when we have to legitimately say no to a child. But the message that we send is often beyond no. It's like, no, you idiot. No, like, why are you asking me for this? Why, like, all the different, extra embellishment that we can add to it. And so being able to say no in a way that wherein which shame is not going to be part of the conversation is an important element. And so here's the thing. The most important thing that we as parents can do to do right by our kids is to make sure that somebody else is doing right by us. The most important thing that I'm going to be able to do to help my kid develop a secure attachment is make sure that I myself am being cared for, that somebody else is hearing my story, so that I can make sense of my story so that I don't force my kid to do it for me.
Yeah, it's truth.
And if that's happening, I'm going to know that even if I don't know exactly what I'm doing over here with my son or my daughter, I'm not going to worry about that, because I'm not alone in that felt sense of I don't know what I'm doing, because I'm going to go back and have the conversation with my 3 other fathers or my 3 other couples of parents who don't know what they're doing either. But in our willingness to be open and transparent with each other about our own shame, to where we say, this is really hard. Let's go do this again.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true.
Why we're going to go do it again, we have no idea, but let's go do it again.
It seems that would be hope for people who feel like they've maybe had a generational pattern as they've been thinking back to their family and their own childhoods, and to say, okay, this is a way for me to change generationally,
Right.
Is to change my own way of saying no. I like that. That's a very practical thing that moms can work on, is how am I saying no? Am I letting my no stand on its own and be enough? Or do I feel like I need to follow up with something? And what does that follow up look like?
Right. We tell the story of the kid who comes to his parent and says, I'd like a new baseball glove. I'm 9 years old and I'm a baseball glove. I'm on the baseball team this year. We're on the baseball team the last 2 years, and all my friends are getting a new baseball glove. I'd like a new baseball glove, but I got one last year, and like I've not gained 80 pounds, so I'm like, I don't actually need a new glove. And if I'm the parent who is saying, we're not going to get a new glove, now I got options for this. Like, why are you asking me for a new glove? Like your glove's perfectly fine, right? Or I could have the other option, like, okay, we'll get you a new glove because all your friends are getting a glove, even though you don't need a new glove, because I don't want you to feel left out from your friends, because I can't tolerate what I feel if you feel left out, because I don't have my stuff figured out.
Oh my gosh, right there. That's
right.
That.
So I'm going to do whatever I need to do in order to help me regulate me, like regardless of whatever it is that you need. It takes work to be able to say, tell me why you want a new glove. Now, of course, we're talking to a 9-year-old, right? It's not a 29-year-old. We're not asking for a philosophy paper on this. Right. So tell me what you want a new glove. Well, I just think my friends are getting a new glove, and I think like, and what do you think? How will the new glove help you? So I got to be curious with him. Like, oh, will it help you play better? Yeah, I'll help you play better. And we know that at some level, buying a new glove represents a way for this child to be more connected to his friends. And also, if he's a guy who thinks that if I have a new glove, I'll play better ball. And I also know that my dad's in the stands watching me play. That this isn't just about a glove. This is about, by extension, I get to be better. I get to have the experience of you being proud of me for being like, on the diamond, even as a 9-year-old. And so what I, as a dad, have to be able to do is to really meet his longing for what this means. To be able to say, gosh, I'm so glad you want a new glove, because that tells me how bad you want this game, just because of your friends, or because you want to play better. And you need to know that, like, I want you to do everything you can to be as good a ball player as you can and to have connection with your friends. And it's really important to me that you know that I see that. And we're going to do everything you can. Now, right now, we're not going to get you a new glove, but you need to know that I'm going to be doing everything we can to help you play as well as you want to play. Because what that kid's brain is actually doing by asking for a new glove, he's asking for more connection. He's not just asking for an object. Now, we might think he's 9. He's like, he's not asking for connection. He's asking for a glove. Like, how would a 9-year-old know this? No, he doesn't know that. But that's why you're the parent and the 9-year-old isn't. Because we are paying attention to the fact that every act of creativity, every act of newness, every act of the next purchase, whether it's the glove or the makeup or the whatever it is at some point an expression of that ancient and distant longing for greater connection.
Wow.
And when that's in,
powerful.
when that's in mind, we say, like, I can say no, because underneath all the no is me saying yes to being connected to you. I see you, I hear how the things that you want. And one day later, after you've had the conversation, you go back again and you say, I just want to let you know, I'm really glad you asked me for a glove. And I know that we're not going to get one this season, but it's really important to me that you feel free to ask me for stuff. And I just want you to know that I'm thinking about you. I've not forgotten our conversation. And with each round of those kinds of things, we are literally reinforcing in our child's mind that their mind is in ours. Now, my 9-year-old doesn't stop and think, oh my gosh, Dad, thanks so much. I was starting to worry even between last night and today that, like, I wasn't going to be in your mind, but thanks for letting me know that I am. Like, no, he's not going to be thinking this.
Mm-mm.
Because that's not where his brain is. But by the time this kid's 19 and you're having different kinds of conversations, you're actually telling your 19-year-old, I want you to know there's no place I go where you're not in my head. And he's going to need to hear it.
Yeah. And that gets to what your book that just recently came out is all about, right? The Soul of Desire is about belonging. And that's our greatest need, is belonging. Do you feel like that is just a really tangible example of how that belonging is created?
Well, I think it's part of it. And I would say I'm hesitant to name kind of, I mean, when we say things, what our greatest longing is, our strongest longing is, like, because one of the things we talk about is, just kind of like from an anthropology standpoint, like even just from a developmental standpoint, that human beings are in lockstep with the creation. We are rhythmic. We are created as rhythmic beings. So everything from the cosmos to the turn of the earth to the tides, to your gait, to your pulmonary and your cardiac rhythm. Like, we are rhythmic people. Even you give birth, right? Contractions start, the baby start, no, not quite yet. And then they go out a little further, then they come back. They go out a little further, then they go off to college, right? It kind of like happens like that, or go off to work, whatever they're going to do, right? And then they're 25 and then they come back. We are people who are made to live rhythmically, right? We live belonging in order for us to leave and go out and create in the world with another set of people. And then we return, and then we go out, and we return, and we go out, just like everything else that we do that is so rhythmically connected. Not unlike God and God's creation. There was nighttime and there was daytime the first day. This rhythm that you read in the poetry of the opening lines of Genesis chapter 1. And so this sense of belonging is intended to strengthen and build resilience so that they can leave. And when they go out and they leave, they go out to take risks. They might make mistakes. They'll do all kinds of things. And when they do, they return to a community in which they are seen, soothed, safe, secure, in order to once again go back out and do the same thing. And in the process, there are going to be ruptures on both sides, in those places where I make mistakes out of the community, in the places where we feel things in the community. One of the things that we talk about in these confessional communities that we work with in our practice is that we talk about these three phases. There's the first phase when people enter these groups, in which a person thinks, oh, I'm coming to this group in order for me to get information here in this group and an experience in this group that helps me go out into the world and live in my family, in my church, my this, my that. Like that's what this group is for. It's kind of like going to Home Depot when I get some plumbing work to go to work on my house. And then at some point I get to the second phase, in which I become aware that actually there are other people here at the group. Now, I know that there are people in the group, but now we're starting to build relationships, and we recognize that we have things in common. The stories might not be identical, but the emotional states are, right? Like your shame and my shame, they come from different places, but like we both know what it's like, and we can be empathic with each other about this. And so we discover that, gosh, there are people like me that are all coming to Home Depot. We all have like similar, like we got plumbing problems. We might not have the exact plumbing, but we're all like find ourselves in the plumbing department, and we're working on, and we start to talk with each other. What do you do about when that happens? And we're like, this is great, because now we together are kind of collaborating so that we can all then leave the group and go out and do the real work out there in the world, back in our homes. And then you reach a third phase where you recognize, like, oh my gosh, Home Depot has plumbing problems.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, all the plumbers are right here. They're all right here in the group.
Mm-hmm.
And we discovered that the work that we do of being open and transparent gradually builds in such a way and strengthens in such a way that after being with this group of homeowners in the plumbing department at Home Depot long enough, I get to the point where Sam wants to talk about the way he's doing this plumbing thing. And I'm like, Sam, that's stupid. So now, like, Sam and I have an issue. We thought that I thought I was coming to Home Depot to like take care of my problem in my house. And as it turns out, like, I actually have a problem with Sam. And Sam has a problem with Sarah. And Sarah has a longing from Gwen. There's all these things that are now happening here. And what we discover, that all that stuff that we thought that was our real life, that was outside this room, has always actually been in the room. It's only now we've had our eyes open enough to see that, like, this is where real life happens. Life is no more real than it is right here in this community, in which we have become willing to be transparent and vulnerable enough with each other that now I'm not just telling you about the things that I'm uncomfortable with about what happens in my house. Now I'm uncomfortable. I'm telling you things that I'm uncomfortable with about what's happening in this room. Between you and me, between the two of you, between all these kinds of things that all eventually do have connections with what's going on out in my home. But the point is, like, if I'm doing the work here, then I can take this. This is where shame is exposed. This is where shame is dealt with. And I now take the work that I've done here, and it is extended every place outside of this space. And we would say that ultimately this is what the church is about. The church is not just a place where we go on Sundays for an hour and a half and we do our thing, and we hope that we pick up something that helps me go back home to my house where the real life is and do that work. Maybe it'll help me. No, we want the body of believers to be a place where we do the work in order for that work to have transcending and transformational impact everywhere else that we live.
I feel like we're just like barely able to, this is the tip of the iceberg, this interview. And that's where I really want to point people to your books and your podcast, because it's just so rich and helpful. And it really is, these are things we don't think about all the time. Here's my last question for you as you leave the listeners today. What would you say are 3 things that people can do right now that help with the integration of their brains and their thriving and their faith?
Well, I think I'm going to take them in this order. When we talk about the brain, we necessarily aren't just talking about the brain, we're talking about the entire body. So there are some important things that, we say to folks, if you really want to have, if you want to increase your capacity for kind of neural flexibility, right? For the capacity for the brain to be more flexibly adaptive in the way it's connecting. Neuroplasticity is what we use, the word we use. If you want to do that, it's important that you get good sleep. It's important that you get good exercise. It's important that you are conducting on a regular basis some kind of mindfulness practice. That's meditative prayer. It's important for you to be engaged in what I call creative novelty. So something that is creative, but that is new, that requires new things for you. So it's picking up an instrument. It's going to take an art class. I'm going to learn a foreign language. And you're like, oh, great, Curt. I'm listing all the things I'm going to do in all my spare time as a mom.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But those are just some straightforward things that we can do. We talk about nutrition, and by that, like, there's 100 different ways in which we can be more nutritionally effective. But one of the things that we can do has everything to do with how we eat. We eat too much and we eat too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's another way for you to actually give your brain space to be open to change. Handful of things for your brain. Second thing, it's really crucially important that we are in the practice of being deeply known by somebody else. And I would go so far as to say, we'd like that somebody to be more than just one somebody's. So we can have a best friend, but the brain knows the difference between when I'm in a room talking to two people about my story than when I'm in a room talking to one person. And it requires more of the brain to talk to two people at once. It's kind of stretching. It's putting more weight on the bar. But this sense of being known. So I would want to know who, if you were to answer the question, who would be the 3 or 4 people collectively, if you were to, could you give me the list of those people, 3 or 4 people who collectively you could tell me know everything there is to know about you? Everything together in the room. If you can't answer that question, then that is something that needs to be, and you start with one person and then you get a second person. You want to be in the room. I want to tell you my story. Like, I've never told anybody my story. Well, there are some ways to do that. You write it out. You take 30 minutes and you write out what you know about your first decade of life. And you take another 30 minutes, write out what your second decade and third decade, so forth and so on. And then you ask whoever these people are that you'd like to read them your story. And you want to give them the opportunity to ask you questions. You're like, who does that? The people of God do this. And it's hard. It's frightening because we don't have a template for this. We don't have a way to do this. But this whole notion of, when you read the climax of 1 Corinthians 13, this whole notion that the new heaven and new earth are going to be a place in which God knows, even as we will know, even as we are known. Like, that whole process of being known like this, like, we better get used to it because it's coming. And so in many respects, what we're talking about here is we're practicing for heaven.
That's interesting.
And then, and so in that sense, I would say we're doing something about our thriving relationships and something about our faith at the same time. People are it's easy for us to say, well, I trust God, I just don't trust people. To which we would say, we only trust God to the degree that we trust our most trustworthy friends.
Wow.
You can't separate that in the human brain. I'd like to say all kinds of things about how I trust God, but people over here, that's not really the way the brain works. Which is why, otherwise, why do we need Jesus? Well, we need Jesus because, if I'm going to be changed, I'm going to have to be changed by a human being. And God takes us that seriously, that in the same way that he created us intimately, right? He's down in the mud in Genesis chapter 2. And then when he brings woman, like, why, like, what's up with the surgical intervention? Like, your husband would appreciate this. Like, look, he's got plenty of mud. He's already made one dude. Why can't he make a woman out of mud? No, he's got a scar when it's all left over. Like, I didn't ask for this. No signed consent. Like, I'm just like asleep. And next thing I know.
Yeah.
So there is this sense in which God from the very beginning is intimate in his creation of us. And the new creation is going to be no different. He's not going to do it from a distance. He's going to do it with bone and blood with his community. And Jesus is the first born among many brothers and sisters.
Mm,
I don't know if that answers your question.
it does. Curt, thank you so much. This is so helpful. It is so good. Your work is so important and so helpful for us as we really strive to understand how God made us so intimately and uniquely in our wiring and how our bodies just in just the physical way work, and then how we integrate that in our with our faith and our families and our people and our churches and our communities. Thank you.
You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure, and I'd love to come back.
Great. Well, we want to have you back because we've.
My goodness. I mean, if I've been invited into a sisterhood, I mean, like, I can't lose touch with this. I mean, I just. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly.
Right.
Well, thank you, Curt. Have a great
welcome.
day. We so appreciate you being on this series.
Indeed. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks a lot.